Who is your favorite musician, and what would you ask them if you had an opportunity? Like you had a moment to spend with your favorite musician, whoever that might be. For some of us, that would be Neil Peart or John Bonham. Guitar players would probably lean towards somebody like Eddie Van Halen or Jeff Beck. Let's see. A couple questions that I'm going to ask Carl while you guys type away is because an accomplished bass player and an accomplished drummer. So I'm not sure which he did with Bruce Hornsby, but I wanted to know from him as a drummer, what does he expect from the bass player, especially if he, was showing up to do a session or a show with a bass player he hadn't played with before. Like, what would be his hopes from that bass player or his expectations on what the bass player is going to provide, and then vice versa is he as a bass player, what would he be expecting from the drummer? I think those are great questions to ask of the rhythm section. Yeah, so I'm I want to present that question to him, hopefully in a much more comprehensible way than what I just said. So there's that, and then in general, what are the characteristics of a great musician? Like, what are all the qualities of a great musician? What do they possess? What is it that is going to qualify them as such? And I'm sure it's larger than their talent, their ability. And then I wanted to ask him, can you tell what kind of player a musician is going to be before they even play? Like how they talk, how they carry themselves, how they dress, and even the gear that they have to be playing on. So those are some questions I wanted to ask Carl. Let's see. A fun one that I wanted to ask him is, what is his favorite venue he's ever played in all of his travels, if he has a favorite? I've asked other musicians before what's the worst place they've played. And a lot of times they don't want to say. And I guess there's some good reasons behind that, because you don't want to trash someplace, even if it is a crummy dive bar somewhere. And the other thing I want to ask Carl Cherry is, what's the best piece of advice he's ever received from another musician? So, yeah, I think those are good questions. What say you? I think that's good stuff. Kent is here. Victor. Mark Grubert, my bass buddy. My bass buddy, Mark Grubert, is here. I'll brag about Mark for a moment. Mark being a bass player. When you're traveling with people doing shows, whether it's, for a day or 4 days or however long you're gone, the amount of time you spend on stage together is quite small compared to how much time you spend throughout the day with not a whole heck of a lot to do. So there's got to be the hang with the people that you're playing music with. That's probably one of the most important aspects of touring and playing shows, even if it's just, the word touring gets used pretty loosely anymore. I don't think going to Seattle and playing a show and coming back the next day is touring. That's a one-off or the weekend warrior thing, which is totally fine, but it, in my opinion, is not touring. Touring is when you're gone for an extended period of time and you're out traveling and playing shows. But you spend a lot of time in the same vehicle together. A lot of times you're eating meals together. Not always, but quite frequently. And then you're deciding what you're going to do while you're hanging around town and sightseeing. And Mark is one of those guys who's ready to go. He's ready to go. Let's go. I don't know where we're going, but let's just get there. And he's always a great time and very encouraging person. And that alone is a great quality to have in somebody that you're playing music with. And then, of course, ability. And then the the vibe you have on stage playing together. Are you acknowledging the other people that you're playing music with? Are they acknowledging you, or are they just kind of stuck in the corner with their head down and playing? Um, I love having the connection on stage with the people I'm playing music with, and feeding off of each other's energy, and just enjoying playing music together is is quite good. That's one thing, like with the midline camp, even with the newest lineup of people, is that we have that going on, and it just makes everything really great and fun to be part of. So I'm looking for those questions, people. I'm looking for those questions. You don't have anything to ask anybody of your favorite musician? I always thought if I had the opportunity to meet Neil Peart from Rush, uh, I always thought if I had that opportunity, I don't think I would want to fan go fan crazy or anything like that. I think I would just simply want to shake his hand and say thank you. that's what uh, that's what I would wanted to say to Neil Peart. Mark, let's see. Oh, I'm stuck on the Seymour thing. I'm gonna have to get my other computer open here. But Mark says, "Great compliment, sir. Thank you." Favorite bass player is Leyland Skylar. In an odd, in addition, it is preferred to focus on the, and then that's all I could see. So while while I'm rambling on here, I'm going to bring up my laptop. This guy who's waking up, and see if I can. I don't know why this Seymour feature just is so. Oh, it just worked. In an audition, it is preferred to focus on the songs or have crazy good chops and skills. Yep. Yeah. So Mark was one of those guys when Cliff was needing a bass player that was going to be in the mix frequently, because Alf Deverona was that guy until he joined Jukebox. If you guys know who Jukebox is, they're um, I guess a wedding party band, and so that was something that Alf really wanted to do. Oddly enough, it was something that Cliff suggested to Alf, and not realizing what kind of commitment that would end up being, and it was a perfect fit for Alf, and we do get to play with him occasionally. But Mark has been awesome. So we had a handful of bass players come over in this room to check out what we were doing and to see what their availability was going to be like. I don't remember for sure how many we had uh, come and show up, but Mark was the guy who walked in the room, who knew not every song, but knew quite a few, and knew them really well. And then his personality was magnetic immediately. And so when we got done jamming with Mark, uh, Cliff and I both went, "Wow, this guy's pretty cool, and he can play." And you're trying to imagine the hang, because like I said, that's where you spend most of your time is stuck with each other. Stuck being that sounds negative. It not being stuck, but you're together most of the day and then playing. And Mark was just that guy. There were some other people who weren't prepared when they showed up, and that's a drag, even if they're super cool people. Uh, to me, in my opinion, when somebody shows up for an audition and they don't know one song, that why are you here? you know, uh, I would feel like I was wasting somebody else's time if I showed up and I didn't know what was expected. I didn't do my homework. Um, and then news of that travels too. You start to find out how small the circle of musicians um, is, and word travels fast. So, excuse me, if you're not prepared, chances are the next person's going to find out you're not prepared, and then you don't get that call anymore. But Mark was that guy. And then the other thing is we had a couple people show up that said, "Oh yeah, I'm ready to go. Yeah, I've done all this," and they start giving you their resume and run down, and not necessarily braggy, but just talking beyond their skill level. uh, so that's also a disappointment, because when somebody's telling you that they're really good and they're so prepared and they really worked on it, and then they just flumble, like I'm speaking flumbling. That's, you know, they're searching around for what to play. That's like, gosh, it's, again, just kind of crummy. But like Mark said, what did Mark say? So I'm not paraphrasing too much. Mark said, in an audition, it is preferred to focus on the songs and have crazy good chops and skills. Yep, focusing on the songs, being ready. I would say, chops are important. As drummers, and I see a few of my other drummer friends on here, for drummers, we can play crazy cool fills that stretch the time a little bit, and the different feels and things that can go on, triplets versus straight, and odd time signatures and those kind of things. But can they keep the groove? Can they hold time? Because that's their number one job, is to keep time. Just lay it down, and then use those drum fills and things to help move the music in the direction that it's supposed to be doing. I was guilty of this when I was younger, and I try to stay out of my own way. But sometimes you learn something that's really cool drum wise, and then you just want to use it somewhere, and then maybe it's not always appropriate where it ends up getting used. But definitely during an audition, you wouldn't want to show up and just be out of control chop wise. I mean, Chris McCall says, preparation. How many times have we discussed that, Fred? Yeah, so important. It's almost even a respect thing. Yes, I believe I know exactly what you're saying, Chris, as far as the respect thing goes. Being prepared, because Chris here has auditioned for one, maybe a couple bands, Chris, I can't remember. And then I've recommended Chris too as a choice for some of these worship band gigs that come around town, because occasionally churches need a drummer, and I've done that for years. And Chris is also one of those guys that does that, and spreading his wings beyond his church home. So being prepared, you are given a list of songs to learn, and so that when you show up, you're going to provide that service, and it's going to be great, and hopefully what they're used to hearing, if not better. And again, when you're doing the church gig, you rehearse, and then you sit around for a long time waiting to begin the service, and then depending on how many services that church might have in a day, you're committed to being there, and you got to be awake and alert and ready to go each time, and also be ready for things that are spontaneous or a sudden change in the plans, and can you roll with that? All good stuff. And then the respect thing too, Chris, would also, I imagine, with what you're saying, is you're respecting that situation and those people that might be giving you that opportunity. So you want to show up and provide that service, like I said. The other part is, if I recommend another drummer, like I see James Harrison's on here. James, I have a tremendous amount of respect for. We've been friends for 30 years or so. At least known each other that long, maybe even longer. Good grief. But if somebody needed a drummer and James was around, because he lives out of state now, I would feel very comfortable saying, James Harrison would be the guy that can handle this. And knowing that, because I know James really well, he's not going to show up and just wing it. At least I don't think that he would, or he wouldn't have the reputation that he has. So I think anytime somebody recommends you for something, like James has recommended me for drum lessons. So when you recommend somebody, you're kind of putting your own name on the line when when that happens. Well, uh, man, James, you suggested Fred as a drum teacher. He's terrible. I'm not, but or that word's going to come back. Oh, it wasn't as good as you made it out to be. It's yeah. So you want to have confidence in who you're recommending. That might be part of that respect thing. If I'm reading that correct, there, Chris. See, my neighbor Doug is here. Good morning, Doug. Doug, I used your driveway to get my garbage cans to the road instead of hauling it all the way through the 8 feet of snow that we have. Yeah, great things there, Mark and Chris, with those things. Yeah, if you're just jumping in, I was asking for people to weigh in. If you had to ask your favorite musician anything, like what would you ask them? James says, "Thanks, Fred. I always want the phone to keep ringing. Be prepared." Yeah, exactly. Because you build that reputation, right, James? You build the reputation of the guy that can get it done, and not just get it done, but do it well, and that you were cool to hang out with. And with Cliff Miller, that's who I've traveled with the most over the last few years. One of the fiddle players that we had on the road with us frequently was Matthew Hartz, who's an incredible fiddle player, and he's got some championship fiddle awards and things like that, which he doesn't use that as his bargaining chip. Because sometimes there's some unwarranted pressure put on somebody when they have things like that. But not only is Matthew Hart's just this incredible fiddle player, but he's a great storyteller. So when you're traveling and you're spending hours and hours and hours, have something to say. And conversely, know when to not say anything. Like, just read the room. Know when to just be quiet, and people want to rest and have quiet. But Matt has a way of telling stories that's super engaging, and you just almost hanging on every word that he has to say, and knowing there's this great punchline coming, or whatever that situation is. And Matthew Hartz is really incredible at telling stories. I try to tell stories and I trip and stumble all along, and I think that's where the humor in it all probably exists more than the punchline. Especially if I'm telling a joke. If I'm telling a joke, I really have trouble without just cracking myself up before I even say what it's supposed to be. So I guess that's just my way. Yeah. Yeah, to just expand a little more on what James said, you want the phone to ring. So you go and do a gig, do a session, and you play drums really well, or you play your whatever instrument you play it really well, and everybody's happy with what you did. So chances are, if they need somebody again, you become the first call person for them. Or if they're talking to other musicians who say, man, we got to find a drummer to record some songs for us, and they might go, oh man, we just had James Harrison in here in the studio, and he played these 3 songs, and it was awesome, and so easy to work with. It was perfect. Oh, well, let's call him. And that's part of that whole networking thing that I've been talking about off and on over the last year as well, is creating these great relationships. And sometimes they take time to get those relationships going. Greg, somehow I got Mark Grubert's comment to, there, I just did it. I don't know what I'm doing different today, but I'm making it work. Greg says, it's funny. I don't think I have, this is part where let's try these on. There we go. You know, it's funny. I don't think I have any topic questions for any of my favorite musicians other than just shop talk. Okay, well, shop talk is questions, right? Uh, so what would you ask them, Greg, in your shop talk? Greg being a vocalist and a guitarist, maybe you get wrapped up in what's the latest distortion pedal or tuner or things of that nature. Some cable that makes your signal better than some that stuff that I was just like, whoo, I don't know. And being a drummer, I'm not even that real nerdy, so to speak, on drum equipment. I don't have a lot of knowledge in the history of drums. So when people start talking about vintage drums and things like that and who made what and when, I'm just like, I'm totally checked out. I have no idea what you're talking about. I just never have done that deep dive. I like new equipment. Um, I have my favorite drum heads and my sticks that I use, and a way I prefer to set up my drums. So there's that. But if you want to start talking about vintage Ludwig drums or Gretsch or things like that, I I will listen, and as I'm listening, I'll be just beating myself up inside like, hey dummy, you have no clue how to even respond because you just don't know what you're talking about or what they're talking about. So when it comes to vintage equipment and things like that, I don't, I don't, I barely know about microphones, and I have a studio. Mary knows more about microphones than I do, so we got that. I got her going for me. Oh, these really do help. Let's see. What particular gear was used on a particular song on a particular record? Now, see, now that's great information. You would want to know, right? So one thing that pops into my mind is right away, Greg, is talking about that, and I think there's been some YouTube videos that are out discussing this. But when you hear "When the Levee Breaks" from Led Zeppelin, and if I remember correctly, those drums were set up in a stairwell that had a high ceiling and a lot of natural reverb, and they achieve these certain drum sounds. There's interesting stuff out there about Phil Collins recording the drums in the air tonight and how that all came about. All that stuff to me is really interesting. And then you start thinking, um, would that sound or that technique be appropriate for what I'm working on? And then how do I recreate that? So those things I find extremely interesting. Even if I don't actually ever use some of those techniques, I think it's still really super cool. James. And James is a guy who's met a lot of people. James says, I was having a conversation with Greg Bissonette talking about favorite childhood drummers. Oh, cool. I mentioned Danny Serafin from Chicago, and Greg called him and handed me the phone. Wow. Okay, now that's really cool. That's awesome, James. Very, very cool. Yeah, what a great story. And that's something you'll remember for forever and ever and ever. And James, I know that you had these percussion days at Boise State, which I don't remember the real title of those, but man, I never made it to one of those, and I'm really bummed I never went. And I believe you had Greg Bissonette there at least once, if not more. Um, that's one of those things that I kick myself for, like, oh, this cool thing's happening. Yeah, why didn't I go? I'm sure I wasn't doing anything more important other than just not committing to to go to something like that. That's a great story though. That's pretty awesome. Yeah. What else? What else could we possibly ask these people that have so much influence on our tastes and our choices? Trying to think about some of the situations I've been in, and well, here's I probably already said this, but I'm going to be on that Drummers Education Connection again today at noon Mountain Time on their Facebook page, and as a guest host this time. And so we'll be interviewing and talking to Carl Cherry, which I believe is a personal friend of Chip Ritter's, because I think they're both in Arizona. But I wanted to ask him what's the best piece of advice he's received from another musician. I always think those answers are really interesting. And sometimes you get put on the spot a little bit being asked that, because now you got to remember, oh, who said what to me and when and why. I think for me personally, one great piece of advice that I was told on a recording session in LA in my one of my first experiences recording there with the band was the engineer pulling me aside and said, "Hey, do you want to do this for a living, or do you want to just do this?" And I want to do it for a living, and he told me, learn to play with the metronome, play with the click, because if you can't, you're probably not going to get hired beyond this session unless you're recording with your own band who doesn't really care about that kind of thing. But if you want to be employable as a drummer, you've got to be able to do this. And had I not been friends with the band on that session, I probably would have been fired from that session. And that scared me. That scared me into going, okay, yeah, can you keep time? Yeah, pretty well. Can you keep time well enough in the studio? Nope. So that was a reality that was shoved in my face pretty sternly, but with a lot of care, I guess you could say, in its presentation. So ever since that moment, which that was the late 90s, probably 97, 98 when that happened. And so I immediately started learning to play to the click, and that was a learning process in of itself to get comfortable enough playing to the click. But I've been doing it consistently since then, and it has made me employable, because when you're looking for a drummer to do a job, a lot of the requirements now are to play to the grid, especially me tracking drums remotely. You know, if somebody sends me tracks and I got to play along to them. There have been a couple instances where I was sent tracks to play along to, and it's not to the grid, it's not on a click, and that is really, really difficult to try to anticipate the push and pull of the time. That's unless that person could have been in the room with me, where I could see some kind of visual cues on where things were happening, but that wasn't the case. These are just tracks, sent remotely, and then I've got to figure out that feel, and that's the hardest stuff to record to, is stuff that isn't on the grid. At least for me, that was the case. So that was probably one of the better pieces of advice I had been given along the way, was to get really comfortable playing to the click, so that not only could I be comfortable playing to the click, but comfortable enough I didn't have to invest a lot of my mental energy on focused on the click. So that was a really important lesson, and a lesson I was glad to receive. Yeah, that, and as you can tell, I'm a laughy guy. I spend a lot of time being goofy, and I think people seem to enjoy being around a goofball. Danik, Big Dan, hey man, back. Greg says, oof, that's wild. People sending stuff with no tempo maps or actual cues. Yes. The saving part of that particular session, Greg, was the guitar started the song. Otherwise, we would have had to at least put some clicks at the front, so I would know where the first hit was going to be. I prefer an 8 count leader to songs. 4 for me and 4 for the band. 8 and you're in. It's a common phrase you hear, especially in marching stuff, and I don't think that's unique to itself. So I like the 8 count and in. Yeah, 4 for me and 4 for the band. That's 8. And also, if I get an 8 count, it also gives me more of a chance to settle into what the pulse is going to be, to get that 5, 6, 7, 8 and in, and having that, rather than just, especially if there's a pickup to one, like if you got to go 1, 2, and if 1, 2, 3 and a 4 and a 1 or something like that. If you get 1, 2 and a in, not that I couldn't do it, but if I get 8 counts, that's very helpful for me. Big Dan, radar tempo. Maybe so. It's something I just pulled out of the air. Just it's 7:40 in the morning, and that's just where I landed. Yeah. So that's like I said, that's one of the better pieces of advice I've received. And I would say also that being told that in the middle of a session, and I have to, excuse me, I hate to admit, but that first song that I played took several hours to get a take, which, in LA, in a studio, and you're burning time because the drummer can't get it together, everybody's looking at, like, meters running, let's get this done. I think we recorded 6 songs for that session, and I think it took me, as we did it more, I got more comfortable and started to. But I said more comfortable. I was getting more used to what was happening, but I wasn't comfortable. I don't think that I played my best on those songs at all, because I was just fighting for my life, basically. But once I got over that and removed my ego and my preconceived thoughts of how all this should go, now it's relatively easy as far as playing along with the click. I do it so often now. It's almost, I treat the click as if it was another instrument in the band. If Will Ferrell was standing next to me clicking the cowbell. Big Dan. I was talking about the song Map with No Tempo. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. You said radar, and I was thinking of a song. Yeah. The song Map with No Click, that's like, and Greg said, oof. It was, that was one that I fought a little bit to get it done, but I got it done. And when you hear the final product out there, I notice it, but I think probably the general public doesn't notice it so much. But even in my teaching, I really hammer home playing different rhythms together and playing them accurately, so that you're not taking 2 beats of a measure and they're rushed, and then the next 2 are slowed because you're not playing those tempos really well. It's letting all those hits land exactly where they need to, right where they need to be. Here's an interesting thing, at least I thought it was. I had 2 of my students, we started talking last week. One asked me, can I, yeah, I think Radar Love was the song that popped in my head, but that wouldn't be the right tempo either. Dun, 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 now I can't even think of the song. Not important. Oh, it's too early in the morning for that type of focus. So I had a couple students ask me this question last week. If I was a guest sitting down to play a song with the band or something, like if they had me come up and play a song, which I'm not a fan of doing that myself, and I'm not a fan of that happening in a band I'm playing either. It was the Twilight Zone. Definitely the Twilight Zone, Greg. um, what would be my first impressions of sitting down at somebody else's drum kit? Like, what would be the things that um, I would critique? And usually, if that's the case, I'm not really in that frame of mind of critiquing somebody's setup or their gear choices or anything like that. But I thought it was still an interesting question. Um, I first of all, I thought maybe just how it was set up was the question, and I said, well, if I sit down at somebody else's drum kit, I don't move anything. I'm a guest in their house, so I don't raise the seat or raise the snare or lower or start moving things around. Um, I don't do any of that because, hey, I'm playing a song or two maybe. I don't need to rearrange the world in order to do that. Just not necessary. And kind of part of that was, my wife and I belong to the Taxi Music Group. And so every year we go to LA for the Taxi Music Conference. And upstairs they have this open jam thing, which is kind of a chaotic mess. But I'm watching these guys get up and they'll pick, and I'm watching every drummer sits down at the drum kit and like they're going to play 1 to 3 songs and they spend 20 minutes, and I'm not joking. They'll spend 20 minutes adjusting this and adjusting that, and I'm like, oh, come on, just sit down and play. This is ridiculous. And then I'm not sure if adjusting everything really made all the difference in the world for that performance. So, number one, I don't move anybody's stuff. It's just I play drums well enough I can just sit down and play, especially for a short period. I've even sat down at a drummer who's left-handed, so everything's completely backwards. Um, so now I'm playing the kick with my left foot, hi-hat with my right. You can play open-handed, so your right hand's on the hi-hat, left on the snare, but it's fine. I could adapt for a moment, not a big deal. And then the other thing was, you can take drums, and you can take just about any drum and make it sound good. Even if drums aren't tuned very well, sometimes just how you play the drums will make them sound better. I said the one thing that you have really no control over is crummy cymbals. So if you got low do cymbals, not a whole lot you can do to make those cymbals sound better. That's just not going to happen. It's just the nature of how they were made, and that's no cut on because gear is expensive, and the more you have, the more expensive it gets very, very quickly. So I don't really critique anybody's drum set as far as turning my nose up at certain choices, because it all comes down to what's in the wallet. How much can you cough up for those things? So that was the one thing, was like, what do I notice first when I sit down? By and large, I'm going to be playing the kick, snare, and hat. That's where most of the activity is going to happen, is between those 3 instruments. And somebody else asked me not long ago, like, when it comes time to replace drum heads, if you had to replace a drum head, like say you have a 5-piece drum kit, what are you going to replace first? You're going to replace the snare drum head. That's the one drum that's getting used all the time. Gary Tackett is here. My buddy Gary. Garibaldi quit Tower of Power. Is that Gary? I'm sorry, that seems random. Is that something that's new or old? My recent David Garibaldi experiences are in this book called Future Sounds, which is awesome. If you want to exercise your brain, this is a book to do that with. If James Harrison's still here, he might go, "Oh yeah." Oh, he retired now. Okay. David Garibaldi's been a guest on Drummers Education Connection. A few drummers out there aren't hip to the Drummers Education Connection. I would suggest checking it out. Um, Great stuff, great guests, great topics always in there. And like I said, I'm going to be on there as a guest host today, noon Mountain Time, 11 a.m. Pacific. Right here on Facebook, not my page, the Drummers Education Connection page. Some people got confused by that last time. So Gary, I think you're just joining us. So Gary, let's ask you this question because you're a man that's well-traveled. If you, let's say, if you had to ask one of your favorite musicians a question, somebody that you didn't know very well, what would that question be? Or being an accomplished musician yourself, what would be something really interesting, a question that's been asked of you? Like, for example, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given from another musician, Gary? Let's ask you that. Give you some time to type. Or maybe you're on your phone. Maybe you're driving. I don't know. But Gary's one that has always got great insight to all of this nonsense. I'm almost out, and it'll be time to warm that up here in a few minutes. Yeah, you're driving. Dang it. Talk to text, Gary. Talk to text. Yeah. Gary and I have had some really great discussions because we've gotten together a couple times to hang out. Greg says for drummers, raw tuning versus mutes and moon gels. Yeah, it's funny. And this is a great topic too, Greg. There are some drummers out there who pride themselves in this torch carrying manner that they don't put anything on their drums or anything in their bass drum. And if that's the case, that's great. And they can tune really well and all of those things. I don't have anything muting my snare or my toms. I'm not against doing it, though, at all. And sometimes there's an occasion where you want to mute those drums down. I think if you start with wide open sounding drums, that's a better place to start than a drum that's already muted down that you can't unmute. And James Harrison and I have had this discussion a few times too. It's all this work and technology has gone into letting a drum resonate as much as possible, where we have these special tom suspension mounts, floor tom legs to allow floor toms to ring. We want all this resonance, and even drum heads that are made to resonate. And then so all this effort's been put into letting this thing sing, and then we immediately, trying to tame that down by less experienced people would use things as offensive as duct tape and shoving their laundry into the bass drum, which is a horrible idea. I always thought that if laundry and duct tape belonged in drums, there would be a duct tape aisle and clothing aisle or pillow aisle at your local music store. How do I make these drums sound crappy? Well, here's some duct tape and here's some laundry. No, I mean It's a great topic, Greg, and I learned. I always thought I could tune drums fairly well all along. I've never really struggled with those things. And also, I would say that there's trends that happen. There's certain trends that happen throughout the decades where um, it might be popular to tune drums a certain way or to mute them down certain ways. So there's the trending thing. But when I went to Soul Tone Cymbals warehouse in 2019 and I did a video there, I learned a lot about tuning from Iki Levy, who owns Soul Tone Cymbals, and he had been also recording mix engineer and had done uh, these big records. I wanted to say that he did Diana Ross's last record, but it might have been somebody else. I don't remember for sure. At any rate, he said you want those drums just to ring out as much as possible, and he said a lot of engineers will want to try, not just engineers but drummers themselves are trying to get their drums to sound like the end result of a mixed song. And he, as a mix and recording engineer, didn't like that approach because he wanted to remove things out of the recording if necessary by, you can do gating and you can really do a lot of shaping of the sound. He said the one thing that you can't do is bring this stuff back. You can't put the ring back in the drum unless you're doing sound replacement completely. Then that's where that would be beneficial, I guess. So I prefer to let my drums just ring out and sound great, and then carve the sound from that, even if that's even necessary. So I'm not against moon gels and things of that nature. I would say if you're going to use tape on your drums, please use gaff tape. Uh, it's not going to leave that horrible sticky residue behind. Like duct tape's almost impossible to remove. What else did you say there, Greg? I used to put grocery bags in chrome snares to get rid of the metallic overring. Huh. So was it just crumpled up inside the drum, Greg, or was it stretched over the shell and then the head put back? That was something that was when I was first getting started. Is you would take felt strips or some piece of fabric that was a couple inches wide and like the first third of a drum or something, you would put that over. Again, that I think that was probably a trending thing that was happening. It was popular to do, and so then you would see that happening. Yeah, I would wad them up and stuff them in the vent hole. Huh. Very interesting. So Chris Collier is a friend of mine. He's a recording mix engineer, and he's mixed the last two midline songs, and he's recorded the first three KXM records, and then I think the last Korn record. So he knows Ray Luzier really well. He said that Ray puts uh, that stuff you spray for Halloween that makes it look like spider webs. It's sort of like a cotton that sprays out. He sprays a little bit of that in his toms to help control the ring of his toms. I've never seen a close up look at that, so I don't know what sound you get or that experiment. I have also heard of putting cotton balls in drums, so when you hit the drum, the cotton balls come up and then they come back down and mute that. I've never tried that either. Yeah, it is pretty wild. See if I can swipe this message away. There we go. Yeah, there's all sorts of steps that you can take to manipulate sound, but for me personally, I try to have everything as wide open as possible. I do have a pillow in my kick drum, but it's extremely small. It's very, very small. It takes up almost no room. It's velcroed in there, and the pillow is barely touching each drum head. I use Aquarian drum heads on my drums, and I'm a huge fan of the Super Kick 2 on my beater side or my batter side of the bass drum. And I was turned on to that drum head in the like 1999 or so, and I fell in love with the sound I was getting from my bass drum, and so then I became an Aquarian drumhead disciple since then. And I've tried using the Evans EMAD, I think is what it. I'm not super familiar with what all Evans has to offer, but I had some other drummers. Oh, you really got to try Evans drumheads, blah, 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 blah. And they had never tried Aquarian drumhead. So um, after a bunch of coercing, I did try Evans drumheads for a very short period of time, and I wouldn't say that I didn't have good results, but it wasn't the sound that I was used to hearing when I was playing with Aquarian drumheads. And then I did try Remo again at some point, and I was like, nope, I'm going back to Aquarian. So I have been very firm in my position with Aquarian drumheads. Sounds like an advertisement almost, but at any rate, just I got to wrap this up and get moving so I can get. Oh, Chip is here. Chip, we're gonna hang out in a little while, which I'm so looking forward to. Chip says, "Yo, I tune my drums, play them wide open with a sky gel on the batters. I love how they sound like that. Also, agree on Aquarian drumheads. Yeah." So Chip is an Aquarian drumhead user, as I think. Chip, is everybody on deck an Aquarian guy? I think that you guys all are, which I'm hoping to be as well. So I did get a message from Chris about mid-December and said after the first of the year we'll see what we can do, build this relationship. Yeah, yes, of course. Secret of the Pros. I feel like it was in Happy Gilmore for a moment. Yeah. Yeah. So my go-to snare at the moment has been the Ludwig Supraphonic. I go through seasons on which snare I'm using, plus what song I'm recording, but Supraphonic is an incredibly great snare drum by Ludwig, as all us drummers know. And I run a single ply texture-coated head on that snare drum. And it has a specific frequency ring to that snare that's actually pretty desirable, and love that sound. If you guys listen to the newest midline song, Onward, there's a hard break in the song before the second verse starts, and when I hit the snare drum really hard, and if you listen, you'll hear the ring of that snare drum. And I'm so thankful that Chris Collier didn't mute that out. I've had other mix engineers, if there's a hard stop, they'll cut to where the cymbals stop ringing, and not cut really well. It's just like there's no decay to the cymbal. You can hear the decay of that snare and that ring of that snare, and it's pretty awesome.